ain't see me, you Stevie. Wondering how I reach more evolutions than Eevee and make it look easy.
What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Ernie, the Blur Without Fear. Welcome back to the channel. Today's video, I'm gonna be talking about Uncanny X-Men number 7. And this is the issue where the thing that I was worried was gonna happen actually happens, but it actually turns out that it kind of works. If there's any one criticism I have about it, like I know I said in the previous video, for X-Men number 8, the thing that I was really hoping would not happen is that the X-Men and the Uncanny X-Men would get into a fight. It'll be one that does not need to happen. It'll just muddy the water. That's actually not the problem. That is actually handled really well, like actually scarily well. If there's any one issue I have with this one is that it retreads a lot of stuff from the adjectiveless X-Men issue. Now, to be fair, some of it is just seeing Rogue's side of things, but even then, we're still kind of retreading ground with the stuff that's happening with Cyclops and his gang. That was really my only major issue with it. There are points where we're seeing more Rogue side of it, so it actually makes more sense to show some of these things, but there's points where we're actually seeing stuff that, well, we already saw that in X-Men. Now, to be fair, because that's actually one of the many hallmarks of this channel, is that, we're the fairest comic book YouTube channel in the entire world. But I will say that, yeah, for someone who is picking up this story and did not read Jed MacKay's X-Men, that part is okay. I think it's okay to, like, set people up for what's going on in case they have missed the previous thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but as someone who did read Jed MacKay's X-Men, a lot of this issue was me just kind of going, okay, yep, saw this part, okay, all right, yep, saw this part too. It was still enjoyable though. But yeah, I will definitely say that is the one thing about this issue that I did not like, especially for something that's a 4-part story arc. I feel like there's too little real estate to be giving it away on that level. But for the people, the regulars, the normies who aren't reading every single X everything, I get it. There are quite a few things in this issue I found very illuminating, one of which being Wolverine's evolution on the stance of children getting involved in what is effectively a suicide mission, a mission that none of them could walk away from this one. I distinctly remember during the Schism event, Wolverine taking umbrage with Cyclops, using the younger X-Men cadets, recruits, whatever you want to call them, and using them actively in combat situations. No differently than Cyclops himself was used in combat situations. Here, Wolverine's like, nope, they can go. It's interesting how Wolverine has evolved his opinions over the years. I don't know if it's the whole Wolverine having run into Wendigo, the new Wendigo, who I've been calling Lendigo, because his name is technically Leonard, but I don't know if that has anything to do with it or not, but I find it interesting. I'm actually terribly interested to know what has caused Wolverine to soften his stance on this. I think that's something that should be explored. Now, the reason why everyone's fighting, I think, is actually pretty interesting. It is not necessarily because everyone's angry with each other. For the most part, everyone's being pretty rational, level-headed. When Rogue pulled up at the end of X-Men number 8, it seemed like maybe there could be a fight, maybe there won't be a fight. But it seemed like whatever was going to happen next, Rogue was more willing to have a conversation than to just immediately start throwing hands. And that's basically what we get. Rogue and Cyclops, while they are not in agreement on how to handle this situation, not necessarily from a tactics standpoint is what I thought the argument was going to be. It actually has nothing to do with tactics. Cyclops is not against how Rogue would raid on Graymalkin versus how he would raid on Graymalkin, and Rogue doesn't have any opinion one way or the other either. As a matter of fact, she is more than willing to have Cyclops raid on Graymalkin right there with her. That's actually kind of where the divide starts. It's because Cyclops, it's not that he thinks that Rogue's team isn't good enough, or that Rogue thinks that Cyclops' team isn't good enough to get the job done. It's the fact that Cyclops believes that there is going to be a more perceived threat of active mutant violence. To be fair, it doesn't really matter who raids on Graymalkin or how many raid on Graymalkin. At the end of the day, this will be spun to fuel anti-mutant sentiment regardless. It doesn't really matter. But the way Cyclops is looking at it, he sees it as though, oh, well, if just one X-Man team goes after Graymalkin, then it won't necessarily be quite as bad. Even though that logic, I think, is actually flawed in Cyclops, and I feel like Cyclops would actually know better that it's not going to matter how few or how many mutants actually attack the school. They're still going to be labeled as terrorists just the same. The difference will just be is how many terrorists they say there are. But I think what Cyclops is maybe trying to say, but not really getting across as well, is that if Warden Ellis decides to make this public, it will look better for mutant kind if it's just a handful of mutants, as opposed to an entire army of them. I get that particular aspect of it, but yeah, I feel like Cyclops has been in the game long enough to know that optics is not what matters here, at least not in terms of what your intention is. It's what people see, and that's what's gonna matter the most. That is why Scott didn't want Rogue to raid on Greymalk, and it had nothing to do with her, the team, or their abilities, or how they would handle the situation. It really just all came down to perception, and that's really it. Everything else is great. Even at a point where Ransom is asking, hey, do we need to throw hands? And Wolverine's like, no, wait, chill out. Nothing bad's happening yet. This is just conversation. We're talking. Everyone's cool. But if you see Cyclops do the Malcolm X, it's over, because he's going for the temple. He's going for the visor. However, Wolverine should also be smart enough, or at least be aware enough of Cyclops, that he probably should have put some caveats on that. Maybe should have said, hey, look, if it doesn't look like he's actually speaking to somebody, maybe don't throw a hand, because that's basically what happens here. It's all a misunderstanding. It is a classic superhero misunderstanding that people aren't communicating in the correct way. But in this instance, everything would have been fine had Scurvy Phil not manipulated everyone's minds. It's easy to forget about Scurvy because, while yes, he is a mutant working alongside Dr. Ellis, the issue is that he doesn't do much. He just kind of chills back in the cut. He is not allowed to use his powers unless Dr. Ellis wills him to do so. We know that he's a psionic. He's been able to sense mutants and read their intentions and thoughts in previous issues, so it's no surprise that he has some kind of psychic manipulative abilities. It's largely probably also the reason why some people who read or got early advances on a lot of the from the Ashes stuff on the Uncanny side thought that this was Charles Xavier, because he was walking on crutches and seemed to be able to manipulate stuff with his mind, and he also was a white guy with a bald head. So I mean, yeah, I'll kind of forgive you on that one if you thought that was Xavier, but it's not. The real question is, what is the relationship between Karina and Scurvy Phillip? There's a point early on in the free comic book day issue of Uncanny X-Men where Karina seems to have some level of care for him, but also at the same time a level of dismissiveness. She actually allows him to speak to her in ways that she doesn't tolerate from other mutants. We actually see this in one of the later issues where she doesn't even like when Beast is speaking to her in X-Men number 8, and he's not even poking at something that would unnerve Dr. Ellis in any way, the way that Philip brings up her brother, which kind of gives us a little bit more insight into why Karina might hate mutants. Are mutants responsible for the death of her brother? Was her brother a mutant? And maybe for whatever reason, maybe she didn't hate mutants before, but maybe her brother was a mutant and something happened to him, or maybe he was just a regular human just like her and something happened to him because of Krakoa. Does it go back to the Krakoan medicines? There were lots of people who didn't get to have those Krakoan medicines back when that was a thing. Who knows? There could be a lot of relation there, but for right now, we don't know anything about him. But at the end of the day, Scurvy is the reason all of this is happening. Phil is using his ability to make everyone involved in this raid on Greymalk angry, which is why they're fighting each other. They're airing out personal grievances. Even after all the dust is settled and all the smoke is cleared, they're still kind of acting as though they got beef with each other. And I'm pretty sure it'll be stuff that gets hashed out in the next couple of issues, but that is the reason why everyone's fighting. I actually appreciate what Gail did here, because, I mean, she could have just as easily just said, yeah, they fight because superheroes. Because that's the thing everybody does, honestly. I feel like most of the time when we have superheroes versus superheroes, they're fighting because reasons. Because comic books, that's why they're fighting. There's no greater, deeper, hidden narrative. It's because, hey, we need to sell books. Superheroes beating each other up sells books. sickos love seeing superheroes fight superheroes, so we're gonna give the sickos what they want, and that's basically the long and short of it. But at least here, Gale came in and put a reason that is outside of the superhero's control as to why they're fighting. The reason why the fight does not last long is largely because as Rogue and Cyclops are getting into it, which, to be fair, their particular end of it does not last very long. It's actually more the other X-Men getting into it, like Temper and Wolverine, Gambit, so on and so forth. Everybody's kind of throwing hands with each other. But it's not until Juggernaut comes crashing into the room like the Kool-Aid Man that Rogue and Cyclops take stock of something. And it's the vault door that leads to Prisoner X. Now, one of the things that was hinted at early on, even before the Krakoa era ended, is that Prisoner X was very likely going to be Charles Xavier. The earlier issues of this series pretty much confirmed that. So yeah, they wonder whether or not it's Charles behind the door, but it's safe to say, yeah, Charles is definitely behind that door. But there's also something else that's looming large over the proceedings. There's a mysterious figure we have seen who looks almost like a mixture of like Nimrod and something else. We don't get to see very clear looks for it, but I have a feeling that that's probably what it is, maybe. And I think that is what's going to be hiding behind that vault door, like some amalgam of Xavier and Nimrod. I'm just throwing that out there. It's what makes the most sense to me. But I do appreciate that by the time we do get to the end of this issue, everyone seems to be on the same page, even if they still are of the belief that someone swung first or that someone else was in the wrong. I think those will all be things that'll be hashed out later. As for the rest of it, yeah, the rest of the story I think is also great. The stuff going on with Beast, how it seems like Beast may have fully recovered from the beating that he took. It's implied earlier that he was looking pretty rough, but when we see him later this issue, when he's actually handing the guards who beat the brakes off him, when he's handing them their receipt, seems like he's fine. I mean, we don't get a clear look at his face, but doesn't seem like anything's wrong with him. To be fair, he has a healing factor. Beast has been shown to heal from like broken bones and internal bleeding, things of that nature. He's been shown to recover from stuff like that pretty quickly, like in a matter of like 48 to 72 hours, maybe a little longer than that. So the beating that he took in X-Men #8, while technically not a lot of time has passed, maybe they didn't beat him as bad as Quentin thought. I don't know, I could be wrong, but I feel like they actually squeezed real berry blue Kool-Aid out of his ass in that last issue, but hey, we'll just have to go with that shit. The other thing I thought was of note though, actually is in regards to Calico and Ember. There's a moment where Calico's horse, Ember, the bridle that they were wearing while they were tied up to a tree, comes off, that somehow they got it off of themselves, which leads you to believe there's more to this horse than meets the eye. Not really sure what that could potentially be. It also makes me wonder if there's some kind of thing going on with the horse and Calico as far as in regards to her mother, because there's a point later where Calico is set free because her family did in fact pay for Dr. Ellis to set her free, as we talked about with X-Men #8. And while the horse does not accompany the Uncanny X-Men as they head off to raid on Grey Malkin, thanks to the Eye of Agamotto that Remy is holding on to right now, there's a point where Calico has been set free by the guards and she's walking off on her own, and she starts hearing a voice telling her to keep walking and to go back to where she came from, where she belongs, with her family, even chastising Calico as she begins to refuse, and even more so as she decides to not walk away from Grey Malkin, but to go charging back in. It does make one wonder if her mother is also a self-hating mutant, and if for whatever reason there's some kind of a connection between the mother, the horse, and Calico herself. Is difficult to say at this point. It raises more questions than answers, but the good kind of questions, which I think are going to lead to even more good storytelling opportunities to take advantage of in regards to Calico. Either way, it is interesting to see the timing on this one, because at a point where, everyone has kind of gotten their wits back about themselves, we see that the trustees have jumped into the fray, Blob, Siren, and Toad, and they're also flanked by the Bloodhounds, which are the new wolf sentinels that were shown off in the Sentinels #2 issue. These are some very unfortunate creatures because for those who are not aware, if you did not read the last couple of issues of Sentinels where the Bloodhounds show up, largely towards the very end, it's revealed that they're not just robot dogs. They're actual wolves. wolves that have been cybernetically enhanced. And considering everything that Wolverine has been through over his lifespan, especially the stuff that happened very recently in Saladin Ahmed's Wolverine series, I have a feeling Wolverine is going to have a lot of problems with these bloodhounds. He's not going to be happy when he discovers these are actual animals that have been cybernetically butchered and turned into mutant killing machines. It's not going to be a good look. I go ahead and tell you right now. Wolverine is, I mean, yeah, I think everybody else will be angry too, but Wolverine especially.